Hello from the European Parliament here in Strasbourg, where today we heard Commission President Ursula von der Leyen give her annual and potentially last State of the European Union speech. With me to go over that speech, what von der Leyen said, and offer some analysis on what it all means for the real State of the European Union is Martin Schirdewan. Manon Aubry, the other co-president of the Left Group, will be joining us shortly. But let's start with Martin. One thing that really jumped out at quite a few people was how positive von der Leyen seemed to be about the socio-economic situation. She talked about jobs, etc. In Europe. What did you make of that?
Yeah, this actually struck me, David, because I had the impression that the president of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, completely misjudges the social and the economic dimension of the cost of living crisis and the energy crisis that we are facing. The inflation is still very high, and obviously one of the reasons why it is very high is that we witness a greed-driven inflation process where companies are intentionally increasing prices to make bigger profits. And she didn't touch upon any of these topics, and that really struck me, because a president who is not capable of analyzing the socio-economic situation of the European Union, I think, doesn't seem to be very fit for office. Huh?
Yeah. She also, when she was talking about the kind of economics, she was going on about competitiveness, growth and stuff in Europe. She referenced there the kind of the tech industry, the big tech industry, the process of digitalization. I just want to quote her. She said, "We have a narrowing window of opportunity to guide this technology responsibly." She was talking about artificial intelligence.
Yes, she was.
You've been working on these files for the last few years.
Yeah.
What did you make of that statement, that narrowing window of opportunity? Is she taking that? Does it look like she's going to take that opportunity?
Well, I'm not sure, actually. I mean, we are dealing with the most powerful corporations ever in the history of humankind. And those corporations, they drive the technological progress now. And they have it in their hands. And that means that we as politicians have to regulate what they are doing, these corporations. So it's actually good to discuss how artificial intelligence can be used to the benefit of humankind. But since it is still in the hands, and also the technological progress is driven by those corporations, still in the hands of those corporations, we really have to reconsider what we can do, how we can regulate, and how we can take the power of those corporations. Because I don't want to live in a world or in a society that is completely governed by the goodwill of big tech corporations.
Yeah, and those billionaires in Silicon Valley who
exactly. I mean, Elon Musk gives me sometimes the creeps, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. I think we're not alone there either. Okay. And then, I mean, there was this discussion came up linked to digitalization and artificial intelligence, was the facial recognition stuff that they wanted to use at, well, in a lot of places, but EU borders in particular, I remember, was quite controversial. You, in your reaction speech this morning, put a bit of an emphasis on the migration issue. The EU's doing these deals with different, questionable regimes in third countries. Von der Leyen put a lot of emphasis on tackling smuggling. And you reacted to that in your speech. What was your reaction? What did you say to von der Leyen afterwards?
I mean, of course, she has a point there that human trafficking is a problem and that we have to tackle it. But the reaction from the European Union, also proposed by the European Commission, so the proposal for the Migration Pact, is completely unacceptable, because it leads to a situation where we have a policed border regime with a militarized border police, where we have deals with third countries like Tunisia, with autocrats, or with Libya, with militias, that then put migrants into camps and detain them there and do whatever. I mean, this is completely unacceptable. And what they are actually about to do is to scrap the rights of asylum. And this is a human right. And we have to defend human rights, and we have to look for a different solution. And that means that we have really to try to find a solution based on solidarity and based on human rights when it comes to migration. And this is my answer. This has been my answer. I was criticizing her approach very, let's say, strongly, I would say. But it was really a surprise for me that all the other groups didn't pick up on that.
Yeah.
I mean, why don't they do that? Why do they forget about human rights, for instance? Why do they forget about the individual right to asylum, etc.? What is wrong with our colleagues here in the European Parliament that they all agree on fighting, and this is right, only human trafficking, I mean the smugglers, but why do they not try to preserve let's say, the right to asylum, human rights, and also a migration policy, or try to implement a migration policy and a common European asylum policy that is based on solidarity? I don't get it, I have to say.
And just to follow up on your question there, like why the other leaders, why the other MEPs didn't talk about that, like the removal of the right to asylum, as you say, or those crucial kind of human rights standards that we've been adhering to mostly in the last few decades. Yeah. Is this the influence of the far right? Is this the knock-on effect of the far right on other groups, on the EPP? We've seen a bit of a rapprochement between certain parts of the EPP and the far right in different countries. Is that how it's playing out? Is the far right influencing politics through the other groups by keeping their silence?
I think one could say so. Getting back to the first question, if you completely misjudge the social situation that people are really living in and the effect that the cost of living crisis has on them, and you ignore the social tensions, then of course you give much room to maneuver also to the extreme rights. But what they do now, what the Commission does and what also other political groups do, is they do not only give room to them, they give in to their political proposals and their political demands, not only when it comes to migration policies, but also when it comes to, let's say, climate policies or the equality of men and women, etc., etc. You could continue with that. So I really see a huge danger, a big danger there for the European integration process, but also for, let's say, the future of Europe, because what they have in mind, the extreme right, is to overcome the European Union, to disrupt the European Union and get back to a nation, of course, a nation state driven somehow together. I don't know, they call it Europe of motherlands or fatherlands. That is their approach. And I don't think that this is fit for purpose to answer the question and to the challenges of humankind that we are facing when it comes to climate change, when it comes to the question of war and peace in international relations, when it comes to the question of migration, when it comes to the question how to fight effectively poverty, how to fight hunger in the world. All these questions demand international and European answers, but what they do is, with their political approach, or the extreme right, they actually influence Commission proposals, they influence, but they also do influence the reactions of other political groups, and this is so counterproductive regarding all the challenges that we have to face together at a global level, at a European level. I really also here again, I can only say I don't get it why they do that. Yeah. It's not logical at all.
Right. It ties into a bit of what you said afterwards, which was like, if you want Europe, you better take it back from corporations and the mega rich.
Exactly.
So putting the emphasis there on inequality, I suppose. And,
Exactly. I mean, those are the only ones who benefit from inequality economically, of course, but politically now, given the situation that we are in, that in many member states of the European Union we see a rise of the extreme right, actually even taking over governments like in Italy or in Sweden, etc. Politically, the benefactors of that social injustice and inequality is the extreme right. So I guess our approach here as leftists has to be that we provide political progressive answers, but at the same time that we show that we are capable of steering this process of transition, the transitional process of the industry, of society, for instance, when it comes to AI, to new technologies, which will completely change the working environment, but also our day-to-day life, or climate change, which will also completely change the basis on how we produce things, the industrial basis in Europe. We have to provide progressive answers, but we also have to provide an answer to the insecurity that people feel, the anger that people feel. And we have to pick up on that, and we have to make clear that, of course, the future of Europe depends on a comprehensive approach that is capable of fighting for better jobs in the future, but also for fighting to and keep the industrial base, but also for fighting against climate change and for climate protection. And this goes hand in hand, and we have to make sure that people can benefit from this process.
Yeah. So yeah, and actually now we can welcome Manon Aubry, who's just getting settled in.
Hey, Manon.
We were just going through von der Leyen's speech and Martin's reaction in the chamber to the speech. Just because Martin was mentioning the Green Deal, mentioning climate action and the link that needs to be made to tackling social inequalities. Von der Leyen kind of, built her presidency on this idea of the Green Deal at the beginning, and she seemed upbeat today.
She seemed what?
Upbeat, quite optimistic, quite positive on the chances of fulfilling those promises and the EU meeting its own commitments on climate change. However, there is a bit of confusion about who she has, put in line to replace Frans Timmermans as kind of head of the EU's climate change policy, the EU Green Deal. What's going on there, and what are the next steps with this? Who is this new person, basically, that's going to be put in charge? And I'll come to you, Martin, for a comment on that as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know how much you've been talking about the Green Deal yet, but I can talk specifically about Hoekstra, who is a former minister in the Netherlands, but he happens to also having worked in the past for Shell. Shell being a fossil fuel company. So you might have a person in charge of action against climate change who's been working for a fossil fuel company in a context where if you want to meet your climate objective, you need to get rid of fossil fuels. So, I mean, besides the obvious conflict of interest, it says a lot about how big a priority is actually climate now for that commission. And this morning on climate issues in particular, I had the impression that she was not talking to us as MEPs. She was not talking to the outside because she clearly completely forgot, I'm sure you talked about, the issue of just increasing bills and increasing prices.
Yeah.
Like not a single instance she mentioned that. She talked for more than an hour and she did not mention it, but she talked about competitiveness, she talked about administrative burden. I mean, what about she diminished the administrative burden for people who actually cannot pay their bills. But to come back to climate issues, I have the impression that she was talking to EPP, so her own political family, rather than us. It was a bit of the state of the EPP rather than the state of the union, because we can see that she wanted to calm down the protest from EPP, but by taking down the ambition of the Green Deal. Because how come she can talk about the Green Deal and a few sentences later, she actually says how fast we should increase the signature of free trade agreements. Can you explain me how you're going to support our industries, how you're going to support the fight against climate change by bringing some foods and whatsoever that is produced from the other side of the world? The next free trade agreement that is going to be signed is with New Zealand. We're here in France, in Strasbourg. New Zealand, you cannot have any place that is, the most distance from here, and it has no sense to bring some milk that is produced in New Zealand, that is the first producer, here to France and the rest of the European Union. So it shows the contradiction on the Green Deal, and it shows that she's weak. We've seen, we had a vote just a few minutes later on air quality, and on that vote, like recently in the last few weeks, EPP voted against. So now we have a clear landscape for this end of the mandate, a new alliance of the right wing and the far right against climate ambition and against social justice, and the role is just to defeat them.
Yeah. Also, yeah, on this commissioner designate, Wopke Hoekstra, what's your take on that, Martin? Apart from the fact that he has a great name, I think is really interesting. Yeah. I've never heard either of those words before.
Like his name.
All right. Let's go to the Netherlands, David.
Should we?
Yeah.
I'm not here for the analysis.
All right.
Should we put him in charge of the Green Deal?
No, I don't think so. But I actually like what Manon just said about the state of the EPP. That is very funny, actually, because I had also the impression that she tried, I mean, it's speculation, but I had the impression that she tried to get the EPP behind herself and maybe a new candidacy or whatsoever. So that was only driven by her own political ambition, the whole show today, and was really not fit for purpose, meaning she didn't present an ambitious vision of how to go on in Europe and how to overcome the cost of living crisis, how to strengthen our industrial base, etc., etc. It was very, very based on the principles of the conservatives. And yes, she also reached out to the extreme right, I agree. Especially when it comes to migration, we touched upon that already. And this is very difficult. This is a very dangerous political game that she plays there. But what's his name? Wopke Hoekstra.
Hoekstra.
Well, hypocrisy? Does it describe the situation? I think so. Huh?
Pretty much. Yeah. Right. I want to play you some of our vox pops that we took from people on the streets and their...
Maybe they should have been in the hemicycle, huh?
Yeah, well, you try. Actually, first, before we play those, I want to ask you about that. Because you, in your speech, you reacting to von der Leyen, you tried to kind of inject some reality in there by playing the voice of someone called Yassine on your phone. Can you tell us about him, what you wanted to play in the chamber and what happened?
Yeah, so I've been listening for Ursula von der Leyen for more than an hour, for a debate of more than 3 hours, and I had the impression of such a strong disconnection with the reality of people. And I was like, okay, you might not listen to us as MEPs, but maybe you're going to listen to real people, because apparently you live, you know, in your sort of ivory tower and you don't get out of it. So I wanted her to actually listen to those people, because she does not. And I wanted those voices to have some echo in the chamber, in the hemicycle, because I do think that the whole debate was so disconnected from the reality, and the main reality for people is people struggling to pay for the bills. People struggling to pay for the food. You have 1/3 of European people who cannot afford to eat when they need to eat, and they need to skip meals. And that's that reality that I wanted to tell her. So Yassine, I actually don't know personally Yassine. It's just an interview that I took. It was like, listen. But the reality is that she might hear, but she doesn't listen.
Yeah.
And I think our responsibility, once again, there is to bring this reality inside that parliament. You might see it around us. It's nice, and you know we live in that nice world. But I don't think that's the real world, and that's why I wanted to bring that real world here. Yeah,
into the chamber. All right. So speaking of that, more on the real world. My colleagues Quentin and Matteo went out in the street and did some short interviews with people. Talking about the state of the European Union from their perspective. We'll play those and then we come back to Manon and Martin for reaction and then we can finish up.
Les gens les plus pauvres sont les plus impactés et ont le plus difficile pour aider ces gens-là, malheureusement.
Je ne comprends pas en fait que l'Europe ne soit pas parvenue à bloquer les prix.
La maison elle est en train de brûler et on fait absolument rien, on parle beaucoup mais on n'agit pas.
Moi quand je regarde les informations, ça dit tout et son contraire. À un moment on nous dit que les choses vont redevenir à la normale d'ici 6 mois et le lendemain on nous dit qu'en réalité non, il va falloir s'attendre encore à une hausse des prix. On l'a vu là cet été sur les marchés.
Où est-ce qu'on doit s'informer? Qui dit vrai, qui dit faux? C'est difficile de suivre. Limite moi ça me pousse à me désintéresser au fait de tout ce qui est politique.
Le problème vis-à-vis de l'Union européenne, c'est qu'on avait surtout une Europe économique, mais on a moins pensé à une Europe à la fois sociale et à la fois une Europe culturelle.
Et on oublie qu'en fait parfois c'est un combat quotidien, mais je pense qu'il faut réfléchir à des solutions qui vont pas aggraver cette inégalité. Avec quoi on le finance?
Je suis forcément, mais je crois comme la totalité des citoyens européens, totalement scandalisé des profits colossaux qu'ils font et du peu de taxes qui les concernent.
Dans les paradis fiscaux, il y a la Suisse, mais en fait, on ne parle pas aussi de l'Irlande, qui est aussi dans l'Union européenne. On ne parle pas du Luxembourg, comment dirais-je, qui sont aussi très présents dans les commissions européennes. Il y a une forme d'hypocrisie.
Ils sont assis comme dans une tour, ils sont tout en haut. C'est important qu'ils descendent tous les escaliers de la tour régulièrement et qu'ils aillent sur le terrain voir ce qui se passe.
All right, Martin, how did that compare to what Ursula von der Leyen said this morning in the hemicycle?
Well, since she didn't touch upon the question of the cost of living crisis at all, she was completely disconnected from the real world, I would say. And those voices from the people on the street make clear that they really have a problem with the cost of living crisis, and that politics, European politics, does not do anything about that. And this is really a problem that we as leftists in the European Parliament need to tackle and put on the table each time and everywhere. And we do that, and we do that quite vocally.
Yeah. Yeah, we're hearing a lot of this talk of cost of living crisis, but as you said, it wasn't mentioned much.
No,
in the
it was
speech
not
at all.
mentioned at all. And if you compare, like, and I thank those people who were actually speaking, and they're speaking about a reality that the European Commission doesn't know. And very much agree with the last person who said, like, you know, they need to walk down the stairs and come back to our reality. And that's to tackle that reality that we as the left, we are proposing a social emergency plan that should be funded by a tax on super profits that have been made and tax on wealth. And it was very right. Another person said that profits have been increasing sharply. The same goes for the wealth of billionaires, but at the same time, poverty has been increasing. So it's not a matter of how much wealth we have in the European Union. It's just a matter of distribution. It's therefore political. I do understand that some people have been saying, like, why we should bother about politics, and they talk. Well, there are people who fight, and we're going to keep fighting for that special emergency social plan.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Manon. Thanks, Martin. Sorry, Manon, Martin.
It's fine, we're just one entity.
Yes, exactly.
We're going to let you go and continue the session. Thanks for watching. You can, of course, follow all of our work for people and planet on our social media channels and on our website, left.eu. Cheers. Thanks for watching.
Keep up the fight.
Thank you. Bye-bye.